Lynn. I'm a classmate with Segun, and before school, I was working for a few years in economics consulting, and then at a technology company. So today, I'm just gonna like briefly talk about the unit economics and financial modeling, but just like very quick overview, and then I'll open up for questions. So I'll go ahead with like the questions later on. Can you see the slide?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So first of all, before we talk about units economics and financial modeling, um, I think you all should think like about what your business is gonna be like. So whether it's gonna be a subscription-based business or it's a consumer product. So you're gonna like produce a product and sell it to your customers, or is your business like an app where you get your revenues from advertising? So that's like the like the most broad category of your business. And then once you have that kind of figured out, then you can think about where your revenues will be coming from and where your costs will be coming from. The reason I said that is because depending on the type of business you're gonna launch, the structure of your revenue and cost would be slightly different. So this is obvious, but your revenue is going to come from your customers. And so determining who your customers are, well, who are your paying customers is important. And that is also relevant to determine the market size of your business. And then after customers, you also need to think about the prices of your products. There are a few strategies to determine the price. So for cost, so one option is you determine how much it costs to produce the product, like the raw costs, the materials costs, the labor costs that go into producing the product. And then you add a margin upon that cost to, that is your required rate of profit. And then that is your price for the product. Another option is to look around and look at your competitors and see how much they are pricing their products, and then use that for your own product. Another option is do customer like discovery and figure out how much people are willing to pay for the product you're gonna sell. So after you have your customers and the prices, then you have a better idea of where your revenues are gonna come from. Then you can think about, you would want to look at the cost that would go into producing the service or the product, and some very common costs that would likely occur for basically any type of business. The first one is the customer acquisition cost. That is like a kind of fancy name, but it's more like how will you get customers? The traditional way is usually through marketing, advertising, but so like nowadays with the technology products, people talk a lot about so nowadays with technology products, businesses rely a lot on referrals and network effects. So like the more customers you have, your customer going to refer your products to other people, and then organically will bring in customers for you. Then you have variable costs. That is, think about customer support, and recurring fixed cost. That is like your rents, utilities, accountants, legal fees, things like that. And then there is also the fixed startup cost. If you're gonna produce a product, an actual product, then the fixed startup cost, you can think of it as like your investment into the factory that's gonna build a product. If you're gonna launch a platform, then the fixed startup cost is gonna be the money you need to invest in to pay the engineers to get the platform up and running. I hope that all makes sense. So that is just like a general overview of what you need to think about when you start your business. Okay, and so next I will go a little bit deeper into the economics of a business, and more specifically the unit of economics for your venture. So determining the economics of the unit economics, it's helpful to figure out if your venture is going to be sustainable or not. So the reason why people look at unit economics is because it's like smaller and easier to grasp, as opposed to you just like look at all the revenues and all the costs of the entire business. We want to break it into the smallest amount you're willing to sell. So what is a unit economics? That depends on your venture, but very often it's going to be a customer who is buying your product. Sometimes it can be a project or a city. So let's say if your product is a software for a school, then a school is going to be your unit of economics. If your product is going to be a service provided to a city, then that city, you cannot break it down smaller than a city. Then the city will be your unit economics. And once you have your unit economics defined, then you can figure out for a given unit, what is the total revenue and what is the total cost for that given unit. There is a slight distinction between the price of a unit and the LTV, which stands for lifetime value. So a price of a unit, let's say I'm selling a subscription that is $10 a year subscription to for $10 a subscription of $10 for a year to have like streaming access to movies, then that is the price of your subscription. But let's say a user, you expect that a given user will stay on the platform for 3 years on average. After 3 years, they will transition to a different platform, or they just don't want that service anymore. Then the lifetime value is 10 times 3. That is like the entire lifetime of the user on your platform. How many products can you sell to that user? And then for the cost, the cost per unit is very similar to the cost that I mentioned in the previous slide. It includes the marketing costs, the variable cost, the fixed cost. Um, so it's just similar to the previous slide that I had. So once you have the total revenue and the total cost at the unit level, then you can figure out if your marginal contribution is positive or not. And marginal contribution is simply just the revenue minus the cost at the unit level. So this is obvious, but if for your business, if you have positive marginal contribution, that means you have a sustainable business. And if the lifetime value over cost, I have CAC here. CAC here is customer acquisition cost. So if you have a high ratio of LTV over CAC, then it means you have a high growth business. So as you can see, like if you can boil your business down to a unit level, determining the revenues, the sources of revenues and the sources of costs is more manageable than looking at the entire business. You might have like multiple products, different services, and you might have different locations. So a lot of things can go on and impact the sources of revenues and sources of costs if you look at the entire business as a whole. But when you break it down to the unit level, it's easier to see what are the driving forces, and you will be able to tell if that specific product is profitable or not. I hope that makes sense. So this is an example. Like I said before, so your LTV is not just the price of the product, but it's the price of the product times how many times you think you can sell that product to a given user during their lifetime. And this is not, how do I say? So it's not like when for existing business, they can figure out the lifetime value by looking into their historical data. So they can know that how long a user will stay on their platform. And they can figure out the lifetime value using their own data. But to start, so to start, I'm not sure, is anyone asking question because I can't see?
No, I'm looking at it, no.
No, okay, because I can't see the chat. Okay, so where am I? So for existing business, for business who has been around for a few years, they have the data to figure out the lifetime value of their user and like how long a given user stay on their platform and what is the retention rate and the churn rate. But if you're just starting your business, one way to figure out the lifetime value is to look into other ventures that are similar to yours and try to use the analog there and figure out your own LTV. Then you have the cost of goods sold for a given user and the customer acquisition cost for a given user. And so in this case, I have a $10 per subscription. And then during the lifetime of the user, I expect the user to stay on the platform for 3 years on average. So the LTV is $30. and I estimated the cost of goods sold to be $15 per user. That that would that would include the materials to produce the product, all the salaries to staff, and all the salaries to um, like the technology staff, all the software maintenance cost. All of that would have to go into your cost of goods sold. And then you have your customer acquisition cost. In this case, I have online advertising campaigns, but you can like, there are a lot of other mechanisms to advertise your products. Some are like the referral mechanism, can you can use that as well, and like the cost for that mechanism can be lower than the traditional advertising options. So in this case, the contribution margin is $10 for a given user. So as you can see, your unit of economics might change over time. So you might start off your business as a business to customer. So like you're selling subscriptions to direct customers. But over time, you might change that to become, you might be selling your product to businesses and to schools, to businesses. So then your unit of economics might no longer be a single customer. Over time, so companies like usually like they spend a lot of time trying to optimize their unit of economics. If you see in the previous slide, like the goal is to maximize the contribution margin, and there are multiple ways to optimize your contribution margin from this slide. You can increase your LTV, reduce your COGS and CAC, and then your contribution margin will be bigger over time. So your LTV can be, you can change, well, you can make the LTV be larger over time by making sure that people stay with you for longer, like buy more products from you, stay on your platform longer. Your CAC, your customer acquisition cost, can go up over time or go down over time, really depend on the types of ventures you have. For example, if your venture like it can utilize some sort of network effects. So like the more people you get on the platform, they will refer other people onto your platform. And as you grow, like more and more people will learn about you organically. Then your customer acquisition costs will go down over time. But if it's a traditional marketing, if it's a traditional business and you rely on advertising as the main mechanism to acquire user, then your customer acquisition cost might increase over time because let's say it's easier to get the first group of users, and it's gonna be because those users are really want the product you're selling, and it's gonna be harder and harder over time to acquire additional users. Like let's say if I want to sell a chair, and I'm gonna advertise my chair to a broad group of audience, it's probably cheaper to acquire the first 1,000 users because the first 1,000 users really want that chair. But over time, I already acquire all the users who want to buy a new chair. The remaining users are not that interested. So my point being, your CAC cost can go up or go down, really depend on your business and the way the market is structured. Your cost of goods sold can also can also go up or down. So always assume that the cost you're going to have to pay for salaries or for purchasing materials will increase over time. Just simply like with inflation, that cost will likely increase year by year. But then as you grow your business, you can have the benefits of economies of scale. So like you can become more efficient with how you manufacture products or how you coordinate staff, and that can drive down the per unit cost of goods sold for your product. So this is also, and the unit economics can vary across products as well. So if I have a subscription to maybe like my venture have 3 tiers of subscriptions: the basic level, the intermediate level, and the advanced level, and I charge them different prices. Then each of the subscription have their own like LTV, COGS, and contribution margin. So the reason why people want to look at unit economics is because then you can figure out which product within your business is the most profitable, and maybe determine some products that are actually not making positive contribution margin. And for those products, the decision, you might need to make a decision about whether to keep them or just not selling them anymore. So I'm just going to talk like very briefly about the financial model piece. So if you start from your unit of economics, it's likely that you can have all the inputs for your financial model, because you need to have all the inputs for your cost of goods sold already at the unit level. So start with the unit of economics. Don't start from like the overall business. It's really hard to come up with the total salaries cost for your entire business. It's more defendable, and it's easier to determine the salaries for. It's easier to determine if to support your business for a given user, how many staff you need, and how much you can pay them, and what materials will be needed to support your platform or your product. So yes, start from your unit of economics and then scale that up. That way you don't have to make very big assumptions about like annual growth rate or annual inflation rate. Oh, one point. So when I talk about the unit of economics, I did not mention anything about the non-cost of goods sold costs, because those costs are a little bit harder to break down to the customer level. So examples are like rents for your entire business. That's not easily broken down to the customer level. Or you have some depreciation cost of your um, of your equipment or interest costs. So those are these costs. They have to be taken account for, but they might not have been included in your unit of economics. So keep that in mind for the financial modeling part. And so to recap, for the financial model part, start from your unit of economics and then scale the number to reflect the quarterly or the annually revenue and costs. And then sometimes you have to project that into the future, like 1, 3, or 5 years into the future. And in that case, some assumptions will need to be made about how your revenue will scale over time, how your costs will scale over time. But if you have your unit of economics, then determining this trend might be a little bit easier. So you can find, so if you have your unit of economics and you can defend that over time, your CAC cost will go down because users will refer other customers to buy your product. Then you can have your contribution margin will expand over time, and then your profit will become more and more profitable into the future. Or if you can defend the fact that if you can defend the fact that over time you can improve your product so that the users will keep coming back and then buy more products, stay on the platform for longer than 3 years, then your LTV will likely increase over time. And that is one of the driving force for your revenue growth. So because you start from the unit of economics, you can see more clearly where the driving forces of your revenue growth is, or the driving forces of your cost trend over time. That is all I have. I hope that all makes sense to you. So now I'm opening up for questions.
Yeah, Lynn, someone has a question on the chat box.
Okay. One sec. Sorry, give me 1 second. I don't know where my chat is. Julian, can you help me say the question?
Okay, I'll read it out. He said, please can you explain the LTV? How does it fit with an app that is free and subscription optional? How do you cost for, and another question is, how do you cost for uncertainties?
Oh, okay. Can you explain the LTV? How does it fit with an app that is free and subscription optional? How do you cost for uncertainties? Okay, so if you have an app that is free and subscription optional, um, is so is the main source of your revenue from the subscription that is optional, or you have, or the main source of your revenue is from the advertising that would be placed on the app. So this model, from what I've seen, like there are two types of revenues. One is that optional subscription, even though it's optional, but like people will subscribe. So that's one source of revenue. And then because you have a free app, you can have advertising in your app, and that's another source of revenue. So in that case, you might need to break it out into two types of customers. The customers who are not subscribing, like the customer who will just use the free version. And for those customers, you're gonna have advertising in the app. So the revenue you get from those customers are the advertising revenues. And so you can still have your LTV for those customers. And then for the people who subscribe to your app, then you have a different LTV for those customers as well. And then you can compare which customer group are more profitable. So that would depend. Like you might end up figuring out that, oh, it might not be worth it to have subscription at all. It's like it's like a lot cheaper to acquire users to use your free version, but then you get a lot of revenue from your advertising. Or you might discover that, oh, it's actually better to get users to subscribe. So it all depends. I guess my point is, in that example specifically, you actually don't want a customer who use the free version, but you cannot get any revenue from them, like not even from advertising. So the LTV framework, it's helpful in the sense that for any given user, you will have to, if it costs money to acquire them and to provide them with services, we need to find a way to get revenues from those users. And even if it's, even though like the service might appear free, but there are other ways to capitalize on your user base who are using the free version. I hope that makes sense. So in that specific example, you might have two different LTV for two types of users. And then you can ask a follow-up question if that wasn't clear. The second question is, please, do you have a case study that can be used to explain this? I'm not sure what this means in this case. Can you clarify? Oh, Justin has a follow-up question about how do you account for uncertainties, right? So that's a good question. It's not easy, especially when you're starting your business, because there's no way to, like, you don't have the data yet about your users or your products, or how effective your marketing strategies is. So that's why I stress the importance of starting with the unit of economics, because that way you don't make blanketed assumptions. All the assumption that goes into your model should come from examples that you can find elsewhere. So like your price, the price you're gonna charge the users should be based on some sort of research into your competitors, or from customer discovery. and all the like the LTV or the retention rate, all of those metrics, the more research you can do, like the more if you can find examples of already of an existing business who shares similarities with your business, then it reduces the amount of uncertainties, because you kind of have like you kind of know that someone already encountered the scenario. But there will always be uncertainties, and sometimes people do like different scenarios, like the best scenarios where you have a set of assumptions, and then the neutral scenario, and then the worst case scenario. So different range of assumptions. um, um, that's another way as well. um, what else? In a sample of a business document prepared using these terms. Yeah, I will see. I can follow up on that, like to find a sample of business document prepared using these terms, um, and then pass it around to Segun or someone. Um, yeah, I can follow up on that. I don't have a sample as of right now, so, but I'll follow up with you on that. Do you know what is the thank you. Do you know more specifically, like do you want to know why they need um, uh, what these terms are useful for? Like what's the purpose of these terms, or more like how do they work? What specifically is LTV? What specifically is customer acquisitions, or more like the use cases of these frameworks? Okay, okay, yeah, I can find something and then um, send to Segun. Any other question?
Any other question?
Okay, great. I hope that was helpful. If you have any other question, you can, I don't know, you can follow up with me as well.
Yeah, I think, yeah, someone is speak. I know, and up the other time. About ask your question. Hello.
Hello, good evening, Lynn.
Hi.
Good evening. I'm Fuad Balogun, and thanks for the presentation. It's been insightful, and I think to some extent, I would say it has actually opened my eyes to lots in the business in financial planning. But for one, I would like to ask about how do we make financial planning for mostly not for profit organizations, and in a business climate where the main aim is for accountability, and not for the purpose of making profit and all of this uh, profit-making ventures. I think I would like for if you can just share insight into how NGOs can actually go about making sure that their of course projections are well taken care of, the financial projections are taken care of, how to plan for how to plan their financials, their finances, and how to make sure that some of those key. I want to, as a matter of fact, believe that there are quite a number of differences between how a for-profit business does its financials as against how a not-for-profit does it. That's my question. Thank you.
Uh,
Let me just jump in before Lynn goes into that. One thing that I've realized is that there is actually, there is a lot of differences between non-profit and for-profit organizations, and but the major difference is what you do with the money and how you spend your surplus. However, this framework that she's been teaching you is also useful to non-profits in the sense that it helps you to decide if you're sustainable or not. If you are not, if your CAC is greater than your LTV, then you know that you will just keep running around and chasing funders. So before you can declare a non-profit a sustainable non-profit organization, it means that it generates its own income, and that income is enough for its activities, and they can also have a bit, and they can have some money left on the table to run other things, to focus on research and development. So an organization will only grow if you have surplus, if you have unrestricted funds. And that is what this framework is trying to push you to be able to do. That compare the lifetime value of the offer you're giving to people for your own project. Maybe it's a well, or maybe it's a wash program. That's a unit. Then what is the cost of making that happen? Is the cost more than the lifetime value of it? Then it's not something you should be doing if the cost is more than it. Or you should find a way to ensure that you get the money. And also for non-profits, one of your ways of thinking about revenue could be anticipated grants or anticipated donation. So it's not necessarily the money that people pay for the service. If you remember when we talked about fundraising, pay for service is just a form of raising funds for the work that you do. So people could either pay you or other people could pay for them. So if other people are paying for them, that's like people donating. So Lynn, I will allow you go on. Sorry.
no, I agree with what Segun said. So it depends on if you want your business is not a sustainable nonprofit, or you someone if you want your nonprofit is you if you define your nonprofit is a sustainable nonprofit or not. A sustainable nonprofit to me is that you will still rely on funding from philanthropies and other organizations, but internally you have a kind of like business model that will allow you to generate enough revenues to cover all the costs. So for-profit organizations, they will care a lot about the contribution margin. They want like big contribution margin, maybe 70% or 50% contribution margin, because that's their profits. But for your nonprofit sustainable organization, you might just want the contribution margin to be like 5% or 10%. That is like all the revenues from the users can cover all the costs you need to create the product to support the users, and you are left with just a little bit of contribution margin to cover like unanticipated expenses. But still, in order to have a sustainable nonprofit, you do need to have the LTV more than the costs plus customer acquisitions. And then for organizations that that are not going to follow this model, like they're not going towards yes, what Segun said is right. LTV larger than CAC plus COGS means sustainable. If LTV is less than CAC or COGS, if LTV is less than CAC plus COGS, you're gonna have to rely on outside funding, and that would increase the uncertainties into your financial modeling. I hope that makes sense. And so if you're not okay. They do.
There is one hand up. Tolani's hand is up.
Oh yes, Tolani.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tolani, you go on. I just want to quickly answer David's question on the box. Your cost of goods and services in a non-profit is similar to that of a business. How did you make the program happen? The cost of your vendors, the all that you rented if you're organizing a seminar, or if you're a water person and you're drilling borehole, the cost of drilling the borehole, bringing guys together to drill the boreholes, borehole piping and all of those things. Those are cost of goods and services. Your CAC is merely the cost of customer acquisition, which in non-profits could include cost of baseline survey, cost of advertising about the project, cost of calling for proposals and all of those kind of things. So CAC is more or less marketing, advertising, how you bring people in, and or how you generate awareness and all of those kind of things. Why COGs are cost of goods and cost of the things that you use, your inputs that you use for making the project happen. I don't know if Lynn, I don't know if you want to add to that before Tolani asks his question.
Yeah, no, what you said included. Basically, I mean, costs mean what you need, all the costs involved in making the services happen. And even if you are an NGO, you're providing the students, the customers, some types of services. And to provide those services, you need to pay your staff, you need to pay rent for the locations, you need to purchase like materials and goods. So all of that costs money, and all of those are your cost of goods sold. Like goods, your goods are not, I mean, your services are goods, and they cost money to produce. So yeah, so that's what Segun said.
All right, thank you very much, Lynn, for the wonderful presentation. I mean, it's been very, very exciting. All right, very quickly. So my question is basically around market research. Okay, so let's say, for instance, I want to begin a telemedicine startup where patients can get to connect with doctors virtually and all of those things. But what I'm most concerned about is, how do you know the most suitable market price that will be best affordable for your end users, and at the same time will still enable you make enough profit, as it were? So I think the question is very relatable to market research. I don't know, how do you go out there to interrogate your your potential end users to be able to know how much? Because I want to believe, if they want to design a product that you don't want to design a product for a particular group of people, and at the end of the day, they won't be able to afford your product. So how do you know how do you know the most affordable cost value to place on your product? So I think that's most mostly around the question is about market research basically, and secondly, for a telemedicine startup, like I know I'm going to be onboarding medical doctors. Of course, they are medical professionals. They are going to be paid. How do I know um, the amount of money that would be most suitable for them as professionals, especially at the early phase of the business? So that's my question basically. I do hope you understand what I'm talking about.
Yes, yes, I got your question. So it's a good question. It's a hard question. So like earlier, when I talk about pricing, I gave 3 examples of how people usually price their product. In your case, I think like the easiest way maybe is to figure out your cost, because you can control, like you can figure out the cost of creating your telemedicine platform, like what will be the fixed cost to get your platform up and running, and then when you have your platform up and running, how many people you're going to hire to run the platform, and with that how many customers can you serve. So you can try to figure out all the costs to make your product happen, not at the perfect level, but it's like the basic uh, requirement of your product, like all the basic features that you want to provide to the users, and figure out how much it costs to produce that, and then add an additional amount of margin or profit that you think you would need to sustain your business. For NGO, that margin might just be small to cover the overhead cost of your organization. For profit organizations, they might want the margin to be a lot higher. But when you add the cost and the margin, you then can sort of come arrive at a price that would allow you to produce the product and stay sustainable. But then the second question is, oh, okay, so when you have that price, is it going to be affordable to the user or not? It's a customer discovery question. Like, but it will be helpful if you get into a situation where you come up with a price that cover the cost of producing your product, but then that price is not affordable to the people you want to serve, then it's a harder problem to solve. Then that means you will have to lower the cost, lower the price, and generate other sources of revenue to help you cover producing the goods. And that might come from like outside funding, or you might have to generate other sources of revenues to cover for the gap between your cost and how much people can afford to pay. I don't know if that makes sense. And then you can also do market research as well. But